The government has effectively said its hands are tied on this, that the Supreme Court made a ruling that said the previous regime, which is, I guess, the current regime, was too restrictive, and they've kind of been forced into that. So what's your perspective on that aspect of this?
It's simply nonsense.
Okay. I'd like to start with you, Ms. Lawley, because we have heard in the media and a number of other reports of people that have been denied access to MAID in one province but are approved in another. Is there any legal reason that this should be the case under the current system?
I can speak to the health system component. Legal questions I would defer to my colleagues from Justice. Each jurisdiction is able to design a health system to deliver MAID that aligns with what their jurisdiction is asking for, and they can be more strict in their requirements on MAID, but they can't be more permissive. So every jurisdiction has a slightly different approach to the way that it is delivering MAID and the way that its assessment process works. On the question that you have asked specifically to whether a person can be denied in one jurisdiction and then moved to another jurisdiction, it would depend entirely on the situation and whether a person had been, is a citizen of a jurisdiction long enough to be able to access their healthcare system and be able to access their MAID assessment. The assessments are not shared across jurisdictions. The practitioners are not required to reach across jurisdictions.
But if a patient is ineligible in Ontario, they should also be ineligible in British Columbia.
Well, I would say in terms of the delivery of the assessment, there is not a yes-no response for most assessors. They look at the entirety of the information in front of them. And admittedly, assessors would likely find there will be some variability in what assessors would find in the manner in which they have done their assessment. So I can't honestly speak to whether there's a homogeneous approach and a yes/no across the country.
We have a standard in place. We have a threshold by which people are going to be eligible or ineligible for MAID. And I realize that there is some judgment that any physician or assessor has to do. The question I have is, assuming that all the assessors were viewing patients' health records and their interactions with patients in the same way, just in terms of how the system is supposed to work from a design perspective, should there be any difference in eligibility between one province and another?
No, I would say that eligibility is definitely in alignment with the practice standards and the guidelines that are being developed to support the MAID assessors and what is written in the criminal code.
Thank you. So we had one case recently that was reported on widely in the media, Keanu Vafean, 26 years old, denied in Ontario, approved in British Columbia. He had been a long sufferer of mental illness. There were purported claims that he fit into the Track 2 model with a physical comorbidity. But what do we do to prevent doctor shopping and jurisdiction shopping in the system if we are going to proceed with this expansion as a country to mental illness as a sole underlying criterion?
I can, Chair, assure the committee that the jurisdictions are taking quite seriously any potential jurisdiction shopping or, the opportunity for the bouncing around the country until you find someone to give you, an answer that you're looking for. Because we live in a country where people can change jurisdictions, and they can, request MAID through different jurisdictions dependent on the time that they have been in that jurisdiction and their ability to access the healthcare system. What we can do is ensure that there is consistency in the standards of practice, and that is work that we are doing with jurisdictions.
Thank you. I only have a minute left.
Yes, there's 1 minute. Thank you.
Thank you. Do assessors have to take into consideration the number of times someone has been refused MAID by previous assessors?
That is a question I don't know if I'm fully qualified to answer because I don't do MAID assessments myself.
You're representing Health Canada, though. My question is, if someone has been denied 20 times, I feel like that would be relevant information that should form the 21st assessor's view. And you are not aware of any requirement that would have to factor in or that they would even have to be aware of that?
Honestly, I don't know in terms of whether that is in the checklist for the MAID assessors or not.
Would it be relevant to understand for an assessor if someone has been denied in another jurisdiction?
I think, yes, there is a rational logic to that consideration, but I also think it's important to take into consideration that much time could pass between these assessments and people's health may change.
Okay. Smash the like, hit subscribe. We work really hard at this stuff. Let's get back to the video.
Thank you. And we'll go to round 2, 3 minutes for each member. So we'll begin with Ms. Jansen.
Just to the comment from both Ms. Gibner and Ms. Lawley about no actual case that they're aware of. If you look in the Death Review Committee report, there was a Mr. A, experienced suffering, functional decline, and he was given MAID, and there was no pathological findings found for his decline other than his COVID-19 shot. So there are cases. And this goes to my question in regards to non-compliance. So Ms. Lawley, I'll direct it to you. If you wanted to design a system that quietly looks the other way, I'm not sure you could do it much better than what we're seeing here. In Ontario alone, the coroner tracked 428 possible criminal code violations in assisted dying cases over 5 years. 178 in a single year, and out of all of those cases, everyone involving the ending of a human life. Only 4 were referred to a regulatory body, and not one was reported to police, not one. Now, in any other area of law, financial crime, assault, even paperwork violations, hundreds of potential criminal code breaches would trigger investigations, headlines, and consequences. But here, where the stakes are literally life and death, the system seems to do the opposite. It absorbs it, redirects it, keeps it away from the very institutions designed to enforce the law. And then we hear something even more troubling. When we ask basic reasonable questions of this government, which provinces have oversight? Who's reviewing the cases? Are there checks before or after a life is ended? The answer we got back from them is essentially, we don't know, that's up to the provinces. So let's put that together. Hundreds of possible violations, no police involvement, no national tracking, and no clear line of accountability. And now, with some of the most complex, subjective, and difficult to diagnose cases in all of medicine, mental illness, we are being told this same system will somehow suddenly function just fine. Canadians aren't naive. They can see when a system is built to enforce the rules and when it's built to avoid asking too many questions. Right now, this looks like a system that has been structured, intentionally or not, to keep scrutiny at arm's length and enforcement and safeguard out of the room. So before we expand this any further, we need to be honest about what's already happening. And I point to Keanu's case. He did not move to BC. He flew to BC. That's why we're here in this review committee. And the more testimony we hear, the more it seems clear that we're not ready and likely never to be ready to expand this to those whose sole underlying condition is mental illness. Is there anything you can say to demonstrate proof of the federal government or Department of Health dealing with hundreds of compliance failures?
Okay, there's actually only about 20 seconds. So maybe yes or no, and a brief example.
I would say to, very valid public interest concerns around safeguards and oversight, that you are right. It is to take another member's use. There is a patchwork of approach to oversight that the federal government does not lead. It is really within the jurisdictions to set up their oversight mechanisms, and they're all slightly different. I would say the one thing about oversight is that the opportunities that the jurisdictions have for kind of the continuous process improvement do play out in our FPT working level. We are sharing that information with each other, and we are learning from each other.
Thank you. And next,
Oh, yeah.
we'll begin our first round with Mr. Cooper for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Dr. Neufeld, in the last panel, Sarah Lawley from Health Canada cited the guidance from the Canadian Psychiatric Association on evaluating irremediability and managing suicide risk as evidence of readiness for the expansion of MAID for mental illness. As the chair of the Association of Chairs of Psychiatry, can you speak to whether this guidance represents a consensus amongst chairs of psychiatry?
Absolutely does not represent any consensus amongst the chairs of psychiatry. In fact, the chairs of psychiatry and the majority do not support the expansion of MAID. In fact, this guidance document has just been published at the very end, the very last day of March. It's not peer-reviewed. And certainly none of us, to my knowledge, were asked to even participate in the process. So it doesn't represent a consensus.
And it's my understanding that there were 8 members who worked on the guidance, all of whom were self-selected. Do I have that right?
I can't speak to how they were selected, but we do know that some of those members are very clearly have been from the outset very interested in expanding MAID. Yes.
And so on the issue of consensus, would it be fair to say that to the degree there's a consensus, it's a consensus of these 8 individuals?
I would imagine so, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, looking at the guidance, at the very start, there's a disclaimer that states, quote, "This guidance is not intended to be interpreted or to be used as a standard medical practice." What is the significance of that disclaimer?
Yes, it does make it hard to know how one would decide on how to implement this very final solution in patients. I didn't mean it that way. This very difficult to retract kind of medical decision based on these guidance. Yeah.
Okay. Now, you noted in your brief to the committee that the guidance offers no substantive criteria for determining irremediability. Instead, as you just noted, it copies and pastes Health Canada's model practice standard, which instructs assessors to consider prior treatment attempts, including their duration, intensity, and outcomes, as well as illness severity and duration. Now, you cited an example of a patient, and you also noted in your brief that psychiatric disorders follow non-linear trajectories, that patients frequently improve after years of severe illness, and that treatment resistance does not establish non-recovery. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Okay, so given that, is it fair to say that the factors set out in Health Canada's model practice standard that are copied and pasted into the guidance are not suitable or not appropriate for assessing irremediability in the context of mental illness?
Yes, I believe so. It is really hard to prognosticate based simply on people's history as to whether there are things that still should be tried or things that could still be helpful to somebody.
You further noted in your brief that the guidance provides no clear instruction regarding distinguishing between a rational request for MAID and one motivated by suicidal ideation, and that instead of providing clarity, could actually create conceptual and clinical confusion. Can you elaborate on that point?
Well, I think the patient that I was telling you about really illustrates that. He was not impulsive. I think what I get from this document is that it's that impulsivity that we're warned against reacting to with MAID. In fact, that somebody who's planning to hurt themselves in the next little while, they are not eligible for MAID. But the problem is, as my patient demonstrated, that enduring, stable wish to die might be part of the illness, as it was in his case. Yet that would be considered an appropriate request for MAID.
So to be clear, Dr. Neufeld, is it your professional position that the CPA guidance does not constitute evidence of so-called readiness?
I don't believe it does. No, it certainly doesn't help me understand how this would be implemented.
And Dr. Coelho, is your position the same on that point?
That was perfect timing. Thank you very much. We will.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone has an opinion about Canadian federal politics. My name's Aaron, this is Canadian Looney. We're going to wrap it up. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a comment below. Check out this playlist, check out this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Smash the like, hit subscribe. Aaron at Canadian Looney. Ciao for now. We'll catch you in the next one. Thanks again for watching. We're out.